Okay, so this is a review for Ultimate Comics X-Men, which is written by Nick Spencer and is one of the new series which spun out following with the death of Spider-Man Fallout. Um, I actually enjoyed this series, but recommending it is going to be kind of difficult to anybody who's managed to be sucked into the Ultimate Universe with this the new series of titles which they put out. And a lot of this has to do with the continuity that bogs it down. You will need to pay attention and have some prior knowledge beforehand before you get into the series, which is one of the frustrations I have with it. And also with the way that it bounces back and forth in between some characters uh, is a thing that makes it frustratingly difficult to read throughout the months in single issue format. Um, but I'll address those shortly. Um, I actually rather enjoyed this series so far. Nick Spencer has a much better grasp on some of the characters, and I would dare say so far that this has been a better series to launch out despite what its predecessor used to be. Uh, I'm kind of hoping that Nick Spencer stays on with the series, even throughout the current Divided We Fall storyline, which is going on right now, because uh, the one thing that the preceding X-Men series suffered from terribly was the fact that they could not have consistent writers on there for long enough, and with it not being kept with one writer and kept on a consistent course as Ultimate Spider-Man was when Bendis was writing it, this series really suffered, or its predecessor really suffered tremendously for that, despite my liking certain parts of it. Um, the first arc of the story deals primarily with the fallout of the death of Spider-Man, and still some of the stuff that came out in Ultimatum, namely the fact that the government admits that the mutants were not a evolutionary leap, but that they in fact created them in a lab way back in the early 1900s. And like this huge wave of anti-mutant hysteria has hit the nation, much more so than in previous times, and everybody is just going batshit crazy. Uh, the government has stepped in and has begun rounding up mutants into these detention camps. Doesn't matter if you're a mutant or not, and it kind of escalates to a point after a certain incident takes place that mutants are just shot on sight. Much later on in the story, after the entire William Stryker thing happens. Um, the first arc deals primarily with Kitty Pryde, who I was really a big fan of her from the Claremont run of the Standard X-Men, and seeing how she matures and has to step up and act as a leader in this is really beneficial. Um, Iceman is in this, and somehow the Human Torch wound up with this underground group of X-Men and a bunch of other mutants in the Morlock tunnels, and Rogue is with them as well. And they also pick up this other character named Jimmy Hudson, who is Wolverine's biological son. Uh, Before I get into talking about this first arc, if you want to see his introduction and the group of other mutant characters that are actually working for Nick Fury, go back and read Ultimate Comics X. Yeah, you can sit there and question my sanity for the fact that I'm saying that you need to read a Jeff Loeb story, but it's actually pretty good for what it is, which I was surprised at. Unfortunately, I wish some of his writing that he's doing now could be a little bit better, but apparently he managed to do pretty well with that story for setup. This is also a title that requires you to be reading the Ultimates and the Hawkeye miniseries. This ties into it uh, a good bit, not heavily, but a pretty good bit. Um, we have a mesh of a Days of Future Past and a God Loves Man Kills story taking place in here when, before or while the mutants are being rounded up into camps and the Sentinel program is going on, Stryker comes out and he's still, you know, raging about losing his family in the flood, and he's going on a mutant cleansing crusade, which basically mutants are lining up outside, or actually being forced to line up outside in the middle of New York City, and he will touch them and remove their mutations from them and absolve them through the power of God. Um, this works pretty good. Uh, I'm gonna be crazy. First off, I wasn't really interested in the first time they brought in William Stryker during the Ultimatum stuff, but they make a much better use of him here, and this is easy. This is a good combination of two iconic X-Men stories being done in one and set in modern times. Uh, there's still the deal with Rogue in this issue because we take an old cliche about, well, we can't trust her because she's kind of two-facing it, and the fact that she may or may not have sold her comrades out to Stryker. Um, and it kind of questions her sanity a little bit when she reveals that she went to a church to pray for absolution and was told by the voice of God to do this. And as crazy as it sounds, it actually is pretty good. And it kind of builds up this mystery because, like, it may be God talking to her, or it may be a particular character who had died beforehand who is actually still somehow alive, which is really interesting. Unfortunately, that mystery has not been solved, but it builds pretty well that I actually am enjoying seeing where it goes. And her sanity is not the only thing in question. While this is going on, Quicksilver shows up at the White House, and during the whole time with them still dealing with the Seer thing from the Ultimates and the Hawkeye miniseries, he shows up and talks about the mutant problem. And the president is kind of torn in between doing Pietro's way, which is, launching the Sentinels out there and would kind of trick the mutants into seeking out sanctuary with the Seer people in China, or taking the advisement of one of his advisors who is telling him to send some manpower out there to try and quell all the anti-mutant hysteria that's going on. And it just kind of builds up and escalates, and it's through a lot of fact-finding that we actually get a major twist with Stryker in this, which admittedly can be seen coming from a couple of miles away, but they actually expand upon it pretty well. And the deal with Pietro, like Rogue, who may be hallucinating or whatnot, Pietro is also being haunted by the specter of his sister. And they're also kind of playing with whether or not she may or may not still be alive, because it was kind of that screw up from Loeb at the end of Ultimatum where he's kind of seeing a vision of Wanda and it's driving him crazy. And it never really revealed that Mystique or Sabretooth thought him crazy while all this was happening. And there's like this new Brotherhood of Mutants formed, and it's just great. The second story arc in this, after we get the build up, because the problem with Stryker is not really solved, it actually, in fact, escalates tremendously once the second story arc rolls around in Volume 2. The Sentinels are brought in, and it brings the introduction of an old X-Men villain in here, and actually ties him to Stryker in a rather interesting way. And the problem is it keeps building up and building up and escalating, and just it doesn't stop. It doesn't. I mean, like, you get moments to breathe after a lot of the action and developments that take place in the story, but like it just keeps mounting and mounting and going. And that's really one of the things I like about this is the fact that with the standard universe, you always have a status quo which is changing, and like any kind of world-shattering event can just be easily brushed off. I mean, consequences would still hang around for a time, but they can be undone with a snap of a fingers. Here, everything that's happened once the mutant epidemic broke out, and a lot of the stuff with the other heroes still happens. The world is not easily rebuilding itself. They're still licking their wounds, and just like it's escalating. It's kind of an interesting angle too that they did the Days of Future Past stuff, which ties in here too, because I would actually be interested to see if this would be kind of a reflection of how the Days of Future Past from the Claremont story wound up turning into this. So you're seeing like the the, apop- the apocalyptic future just unfolding before you, and it's terrific about this story. With the time lift, I really say the only downside of this stuff is when they stop to examine Storm and Colossus in issues 8 and 9, because that really kind of drags. But that's probably the weakest stuff in here. Overall, this is an excellent series that they've relaunched with, and anybody who was a fan of this or kind of getting new to it and needing information, get it and then jump into it. I think you'll enjoy it.